So we've looked at almost every aspect of life during the Gilded Age. We've been talking about industrialization, the growth of cities. We've talked about what things were like in the South. We've talked about what things were like out West. So really the only things we have left to look at are the politics of the Gilded Age, and then we're going to look a little bit closer at the effect that politics have on farmers and, farmers on politics more specifically. So we've got our Reconstruction presidents right here at the very top, right? Johnson and Grant. But then Rutherford B. Hayes begins our Gilded Age president. And so Rutherford B. Hayes all the way down to Grover Cleveland, number 24. Those are our Gilded Age presidents. William McKinley, you could say he was a Gilded Age president, but you could also say he was an imperialism progressive president. So either one. So Rutherford B. Hayes, you should remember him. We see his presidency as the end of Reconstruction, right? As soon as he's elected, that's when it pretty much is over. And I bet the rest of these guys you haven't really heard of, right? James Garfield, Chester Arthur, Grover Cleveland, Benjamin Harrison. They probably don't sound familiar to you at all. Or at least most of them don't. And that's because, to be honest, these are pretty worthless guys. They don't really accomplish a whole lot. They're very forgettable. James Garfield you might have heard of because he was assassinated by a politician who didn't agree with some of his political ideas, but there was no drama, surrounding his assassination. With Lincoln, there's drama because, there was this whole secret society and the Civil War and all this crazy stuff going on with Kennedy, drama. There's definitely drama. We don't even know who exactly killed Kennedy, so that's easy to say that there's drama, but we can't really say that there was drama with Garfield's assassination because we kept the guy who did it. He admitted it. It was just pretty straightforward. President McKinley will also be assassinated, but we'll get to that later. So Chester Arthur, once again, like I said, same thing about Rutherford B. Hayes, and Garfield, really just pretty forgettable. The only one worth really mentioning is Grover Cleveland. And I'm sure you're like, this is a mistake. Here he is, and then here he is again. But it is not a mistake. Grover Cleveland was president 22 and 24. He was president and ran for re-election, lost to Benjamin Harrison, then ran again and won. So his presidencies, his terms are divided up by Benjamin Harrison. But aside from that interesting little tidbit, he was also known for his integrity. He tried really hard, to solve a lot of the political corruption that we were seeing in Washington at the time. So he's really the only one that's worth thinking about. So our political parties were pretty even at this point. We've got, our Republicans and Democrats, and they both pretty much shared equal power. So we wouldn't want to say that, Republicans were controlling the Gilded Age or Democrats were controlling the Gilded Age. It was definitely sort of a shared type of situation. So when we get into the next unit, we'll be talking about the Progressive Era, and that's really where we're going to start solving a lot of the problems that we identify in the Gilded Age. And the best way to sort of make people aware of problems, is to get it in the press. Like when you see problems, social problems today, like when we see racial tensions with police officers in cities like Baltimore, that you see things like that in the news, on social media. Well, back then, obviously, we don't have the social media, and we don't have, news on TV. You can't just Google a news article. Newspapers, print was really the only form of news, and not everyone could read, so political cartoons are going to be so important. So you've got two political cartoonists that we need to know. The first is Thomas Nast, who you probably have heard of before because we talked about him in American History 1. He was a cartoonist for Harper's Weekly, and he, drew about a ton of different topics, political corruption, industrialists, labor unions, the Knights of Labor groups like that, all sorts of different stuff. But his most famous subject was definitely Boss Tweed. If you remember Boss Tweed, he was the New York senator who embezzled all that money with Tammany Hall from the city of New York. So this picture here where he's got a bag of money for a head, that's really Thomas Nast, probably his most famous political cartoon. He actually helped to get Boss Tweed arrested because he was so sort of adamant about publishing these pictures and sort of bringing to light all the things that he was doing. The other guy that you need to know is Joseph Kepler. His articles, or sorry, I keep saying articles, like he wrote, he did not write, he drew. His cartoons, he might not have published as many that were not as famous, but he definitely published, just as many, if not more, covering just as much of a wide range of topics, and he worked for multiple publication. So this is really going to be really important. Political cartoons are going to be such a big deal in terms of making people aware of the problems that we were having during the Gilded Age, especially the political problems. So one of the big political problems we have been having has been the spoils system. If you remember this, it goes back to Andrew Jackson, who started this, basically just appointing people who you are familiar with, people who support you, not necessarily people who are qualified for the job, and that leads to a lot of political corruption. We've got people who don't really know what they're doing in public office, who are only looking out for themselves. So finally, President Garfield does get behind the idea of civil service reform. The parties were both pretty split on this, because the spoils system made each party, very independently powerful, because, when they got into the office, when they got into an executive office position, they had so much control. So both parties had plenty of people who were for the spoils system. But as we see more political corruption, both parties do have people that are for reform. So finally, we're able to get some reform, and that's called civil service reform. Someone who is a civil servant or a civil service employee, those are people who work for the government. So reforming that is reforming the way we hire government employees. So we finally passed the Pendleton Civil Service Act, and basically what that does is it creates a civil service exam. So in order to work for the government, you have to, or to have certain government positions, you have to pass a civil service exam. So it's eventually going to become very widely used and a great tool. So not exactly a foolproof way, but it's definitely sort of trying to rein in on a lot of that political corruption that we've been seeing. Now, economics are going to be a pretty big dividing factor for our two political parties, always and forever. They definitely were back then. Tariffs were a huge issue. Republicans were pretty pro-tariff, and Democrats were pretty anti-tariff. And it's a pretty logical thing if you think about the ideas of each political party. Republicans have always had this idea of being the party of big business and the party of industry and wealth. And obviously tariffs help that, right? That helps businesses inside the United States when we have tariffs, protective tariffs. So that's why Republicans would be pro-tariff, but Democrats have always favored more, outside trade, bottom-up type of deal. And so that's why they would be more anti-tariff. And another thing that is really dividing our political arena is the idea of the gold standard. So the gold standard, so I've got these gold bars on the slide here. The gold standard is the idea that, or not the idea, it is when we back up all of our physical money, all our greenbacks, all our physical currency out there floating around, we back it up with physical gold in the U.S. Treasury. That helps to sort of streamline and maintain our the value of our currency, and helps to sort of like get rid of inflation. Now, this can be difficult. The government only accepting gold can be difficult for people on the lower end of the economic spectrum, because silver is more readily available to them. So a lot of people prefer silver over gold, especially like farmers and poor industrial workers. And that idea is called bimetallism, when you want to push for both, metals. Bi means two, right? So we're going to see certain political parties torn on the idea of bimetallism, and certain political parties formed on the idea of bimetallism. That's going to be important as we go into the future.